History isn't what you think. It's what they needed you to believe. You were taught that civilization began with primitive tools, mud huts, and slow progress. That before the Greeks, the Romans, and the empires of written time, we were wandering tribes just trying to survive. But that story is a cover, a veil, a carefully constructed myth to hide something older, deeper, and infinitely more powerful. Atlantis wasn't a fantasy, it was a memory buried so thoroughly, not just in the sand, but in your soul. What if the fall of Atlantis wasn't the end of an era, but the start of your forgetting? And what if that memory is starting to return, not by accident, but by design? The teachings were never lost. They were encoded, scattered, hidden in symbols, rituals, and whispers across ancient traditions. And now, they're resurfacing. You didn't find this video by chance. Something inside you is remembering. Let's go back to where it was all lost, and where you can start remembering. You've been told Atlantis was a myth, a bedtime story for esoteric dreamers, a fantasy cooked up by philosophers, later twisted into cartoons and conspiracy theories. That alone should make you curious, because anything they work this hard to discredit usually holds more truth than they want you to know. Atlantis wasn't just real, it was the apex of human potential. A civilization that mastered both the spiritual and the scientific, the inner and the outer worlds. They understood energy not as theory, but as a living force, one they could work with, align with, and use to elevate consciousness beyond the limits we now call reality. Their cities were built in harmony with the Earth's energy lines. Their structures weren't just aesthetic. They were energetic instruments, aligned with stars and frequencies most people today can't even perceive. These people weren't guessing their way through evolution. They remembered who they were, where they came from, and why they were here. What modern science sees as separate, mind, matter, energy, they saw as one unified field. The Atlanteans understood that everything is frequency, and that consciousness is the root of creation itself. They weren't primitive. They weren't guessing. They were deliberate. And that's exactly why their legacy had to be buried. Because a society rooted in spiritual sovereignty and energetic mastery cannot be controlled. You can't sell a savior to someone who knows they're divine. You can't herd individuals who are already aligned with cosmic law. And you certainly can't profit from a world that has no need for external validation systems or control. So what did they do? They erased it. Or at least they tried. But truth has a strange way of surviving. You'll find fragments of it in Egypt, in the Emerald Tablets, in the teachings of Hermes, Thoth, and Pythagoras. Echoes of it in Eastern mysticism, indigenous wisdom, and the Hermetic laws. And if you look close enough, you'll feel it in yourself, like a quiet frequency vibrating just beneath the noise of modern life. This is not about blind belief. It's about resonance. When something is true, you don't need to be convinced. You feel it. And if you're still here, reading this, then you felt it too. A sense that there's something missing from the world's story, and that maybe, just maybe, it's been missing from yours too. Some of the deeper principles, especially around energy manipulation and soul geometry, can't be shared here. That's why we created Insights Academy, our free newsletter. Sign up via the link in the description to access what we can't say publicly and receive a free ebook copy of the Kybalion for a limited time only. Because once you start to remember, you'll see the world for what it really is. A patchwork of half-truths built on top of forgotten greatness. Atlantis didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it got too powerful, too fast, without enough integrity to hold it. And those who survived, the real initiates, knew this. That's why they didn't try to rebuild it the same way. Instead, they hid the teachings, encoded them, and passed them down through symbols, schools, and stories. They knew the time would come again when humanity would be ready to remember, not just intellectually, but spiritually. That time is now. You didn't stumble onto this by mistake. You're part of the return. We've been taught to separate science from spirit, technology from consciousness, energy from intention. But for the Atlanteans, these weren't separate forces. They were threads of the same tapestry. Their greatest advancements weren't just technological, they were energetic. They didn't just build with stone, they built with frequency. They didn't just speak, they resonated. They didn't just observe the stars, they conversed with the cosmos. Every aspect of their civilization was designed not to control nature, but to align with it. Atlantean structures were vibrational tools. Some were built to heal, others to open portals. Some to anchor planetary energy in harmony with the Earth's ley lines. What modern minds call mythical devices, like the crystal energy generators, sound temples, and dimensional gates, were real to them, real, functional, and precise. Imagine a chamber where frequency is so perfectly tuned, it can repair cells, rebalance the mind, and realign the soul. These weren't fantasy constructs. They were based on a deep understanding of sacred geometry, sound harmonics, and the multidimensional layers of existence. Atlantean initiates trained for decades to master inner stillness, control their biofield, and consciously shift their vibrational state. They understood that consciousness could leave the body, not in imagination, but in actuality. They developed spiritual technology to support this. Crystal matrices that enhanced psychic abilities, energy tools that amplified intention, and sound frequencies that could transport consciousness across planes. This wasn't escapism, this was evolution. They didn't seek God outside themselves. They remembered that divinity lived within them, and then built technologies to support that inner journey. Much of what we call advanced today is, in comparison, crude. We create devices that distract. They created devices that awakened. While we mine the earth for data, they listened to her for wisdom. While we scan the skies for life, they knew that life existed in infinite forms, some beyond the visible spectrum. They didn't theorize about multidimensionality, they navigated it. And here's the part that hits deepest. This knowledge didn't die with them. It was never lost, only hidden. Hidden in the blueprints of ancient temples, encrypted in symbols, preserved in teachings passed down through lineages most have forgotten. You may feel something familiar in this, like you've seen these temples in a dream, heard these frequencies in silence, felt a strange pull toward symbols you can't quite explain. That's not a coincidence, that's remembrance. And it suggests something most people will never consider, that you may have walked among them before, that you may have once stood inside a chamber vibrating with light and sound. Not as a visitor, but as a student, or even a master. So why don't we know this? Why isn't it taught in schools or discussed in science journals? Because the implications would shatter everything we're told about what it means to be human. If consciousness is the key to energy, and energy is the fabric of reality, then what we call impossible isn't just possible, it's natural. The Atlanteans didn't guess their way to wisdom. They remembered it. And if you're reading this with a strange sense of déjà vu, you might be starting to remember too. We live in a world obsessed with what we can see, touch, and measure. We're told that reality is physical, solid, and bound by laws that can't be bent. But the Atlanteans didn't see the world through that lens. To them, the material world was only the outermost layer of existence. Beneath it, within it, was frequency, vibration, energy, and motion. They knew that everything we perceive as solid is, at its core, vibrating energy. And they didn't just understand this, they mastered it. Every thought, every emotion, every word you speak carries a frequency. It isn't metaphorical, it's literal. Sound moves energy. Intention shapes it. Consciousness directs it. This is the law of vibration, one of the foundational principles the Atlanteans lived by. It governed how they healed, how they built, how they communicated, how they evolved. They didn't rely on language to transfer knowledge. They used vibration. Through tone, color, symbol, and resonance, they could encode and share information in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. To them, frequency wasn't a concept, it was a tool. They used sound frequencies to activate parts of the body, awaken dormant memory, or alter states of consciousness. Chanting wasn't ritual, it was recalibration. Music wasn't entertainment, it was medicine. And when used intentionally, these frequencies could do what we now try to achieve through technology, medication, and endless self-help noise. The Atlanteans didn't try to manipulate the external world first. They changed their internal frequency and watched reality shift in response. This wasn't magic. It was science. A science built on direct experience and spiritual law, not reductionist logic. Modern quantum physics is just beginning to scrape the surface of what the Atlanteans already knew: that energy responds to consciousness, that reality is malleable, and that what we call miracles are simply natural laws we've forgotten how to use. You are not a static being. You are vibration wrapped in form. You are frequency, tuning into reality like a radio dial. Shift your frequency and you shift your life. But the world you live in was built to keep your dial fixed. Through media, fear, and distraction, your vibrational state is constantly being pulled toward lower frequencies: guilt, shame, anxiety, scarcity. You're not just being misled, you're being tuned without your consent. And if you don't understand frequency, you'll spend your entire life reacting to energies you can't see, never realizing that you have the power to shift them. That power isn't in some ancient device or guru's teaching. It's in you, and it always has been. The Atlanteans knew this. They saw the body as an instrument, an antenna for divine frequency. They trained themselves to become conscious conductors of energy, not just to feel better, but to evolve, to ascend, to merge with higher realms of intelligence. They lived by vibrational alignment, not dogma. And when dissonance crept in, when the frequency of greed, ego, and power distortion began to rise, it was the beginning of the end. Because frequency is not neutral. It builds, and it breaks. And when a civilization tunes itself too far from truth, collapse becomes inevitable. The law of vibration wasn't a theory for them. It was a warning. It was also a promise. If everything is frequency, then everything can be changed. This is what they left us. Not just knowledge, but a code, a key, a way to remember who and what we are through resonance. And right now, something in you is starting to vibrate differently. That's not a coincidence. That's alignment. You were never meant to forget. Not your past lives, not your purpose, not the ancient truths that once pulsed through your spirit like electricity through a living grid. But somewhere along the way, your memory was taken, not by accident, but by design. What if the forgetfulness you've been taught to accept as normal is actually the result of a long, intentional erasure? You weren't born disconnected, you were conditioned to be. And the system that governs your life today was built to keep it that way. From the moment you were born, you were immersed in a world engineered to shut down your spiritual faculties. You were taught to doubt your intuition, to mistrust your inner voice, to silence the parts of you that remembered something more. Schools rewarded memorization, not knowing. Religion taught obedience, not inner truth. Science dismissed anything it couldn't measure, and society demanded conformity at the cost of curiosity. The result? A culture of amnesia, where people walk around with no idea who they are, where they came from, or what they're capable of. The Atlanteans understood reincarnation not as a theory, but as a lived truth. They trained initiates to carry knowledge across lifetimes. Death wasn't an end, it was a doorway. The soul's memory could be retained, accessed, and expanded over lifetimes if the right vibrational conditions were maintained. But when those conditions collapsed, when the fall began, so did the forgetting. And in the millennia that followed, systems were established to keep that forgetting intact, because a soul that remembers is a soul that can't be controlled. What would happen if you suddenly remembered who you've been before? If you could access the wisdom, pain, power, and clarity of dozens of lifetimes? What if you could reconnect to the you who walked in Atlantis, who studied the sacred geometry of creation, who mastered the laws of vibration, who healed with intention and communicated with light? That version of you didn't disappear. It's buried beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and programming, but it's still there, and it's calling you. This is why people feel drawn to ancient symbols they don't understand, to temples they've never visited, to texts they can't explain, yet somehow know are speaking directly to them. This isn't random. It's resonance. Your soul is reacting to frequencies it once knew intimately, that pull you feel toward the esoteric, the mystical, the ancient. It's not a hobby. It's a breadcrumb trail back to your original self. But here's the trap. The modern world has turned this ancient calling into a trend. Spirituality has been commodified, diluted, repackaged as a product you consume, rather than a path you walk. It tells you to buy crystals, but not how to activate them, to manifest, but not how to purify intention, to meditate, but not how to remember. That's not awakening. That's distraction wearing sacred robes. The real path is harder, quieter, and far more powerful. It doesn't come from the outside. It emerges from within. Once you realize you were never really asleep, you were just fogged. And that fog can be cleared. The Atlanteans passed down tools not just to teach, but to help you recover memory. Not intellectual memory, but soul memory. The kind that comes not through thought, but through feeling, through resonance, through direct, unfiltered experience. And once that memory begins to stir, nothing is ever the same again. Because once you remember who you really are, the system loses its grip, and your path becomes undeniable. You weren't meant to be asleep. You were meant to awaken, again and again, until your soul remembered the whole truth. The fall of Atlantis wasn't just a tragedy, it was a prophecy. Not a prophecy about the end, but about the consequences of forgetting who we are. The stories we've inherited about its destruction paint it as a cautionary tale wrapped in mystery, lost to floodwaters, earthquakes, and cosmic upheaval. But that's just the surface. The deeper truth is far more uncomfortable, because it forces us to ask, are we making the same mistakes right now? Atlantean civilization didn't collapse overnight. It fell gradually, first in spirit, then in structure. As their knowledge advanced, so did their ego. The harmony they once lived by was replaced with hierarchy. The reverence they held for energy became hunger for power. Spiritual wisdom was no longer treated as sacred. It was weaponized, commercialized, and stripped of its soul. Sound familiar? We live in a world obsessed with progress but bankrupt in meaning, where data is worshipped, truth is twisted, and technology is revered as if it were the new god. We've been here before. The warnings were encoded in myths for a reason. Not to entertain us, but to remind us. Atlantis didn't fall because of nature. It fell because of imbalance. The people who once walked in alignment with universal law began to override those laws in pursuit of control. They used spiritual technology without spiritual maturity. And that's the most dangerous combination there is. When power outruns wisdom, collapse becomes inevitable. Not as punishment, but as correction. The universe resets what goes too far off course. Look around today and you'll see the same fracture lines forming. We've cracked open the atom but lost the soul. We've built skyscrapers but forgotten how to build inner stillness. We chase speed, scale, and status while neglecting the one thing that made Atlantis extraordinary: alignment. Alignment with energy, with the earth, with spirit, and with self. When that alignment breaks, civilizations don't just fall, they disappear. And not just physically, but energetically. The echo of their fall lingers in our subconscious like a ghost. That uneasy feeling that something's off. It's not just in your head, it's in your lineage. The ancients tried to warn us, not with fear, but with pattern. They understood the cyclical nature of time. They knew humanity would rise and fall in waves, each era offering a chance to either evolve or repeat. And the teachings they left behind weren't just wisdom, they were lifelines. Codes to help future generations remember, course correct, and rise again. But only if we listened, only if we paid attention to the signs, not just in the world but within ourselves. Because the fall of Atlantis didn't just end an age, it triggered a spiritual amnesia that's lasted for thousands of years. And the only way to stop history from repeating itself is to remember what caused the collapse in the first place. It wasn't a lack of intelligence or resources. It wasn't an external invasion or divine punishment. It was an inner disconnection. The moment they stopped honoring the sacred, everything began to fracture. So what about now? What happens when artificial intelligence begins to outpace human consciousness? When we trade spiritual depth for digital distraction? When we chase dopamine over discipline? The parallels are not subtle. They're screaming at us. We are walking the same line they walked, and we're walking it fast. But here's the shift. This time you're awake. You're seeing the pattern. You're remembering the lesson. And you have a choice. We all do. Will we embody the teachings that were left behind? Or will we become just another echo in the ruins of forgotten wisdom? The myth of Atlantis wasn't meant to make us wonder about the past. It was meant to make us question the present, and more importantly, to shape the future. Not by avoiding collapse, but by evolving beyond the consciousness that creates it. The fall was real, but so is the return. The teachings weren't lost. They were buried, hidden in glyphs, echoed in chants, encrypted in stone and stars, waiting for those who could feel rather than just think. The knowledge that once sustained Atlantis didn't vanish. It scattered. Like seeds on the wind, it drifted into mystery schools, sacred texts, oral traditions, and secret initiations. It passed quietly from hand to hand, lifetime to lifetime, soul to soul. And now it's finding its way back. Not because the world is ready, but because you are. These teachings aren't meant to be studied. They're meant to be remembered, felt, lived. Because they're not just information, they're frequencies. When you hear them, something inside you shifts. Not because it's new, but because it's ancient. A forgotten language your soul already speaks. And once you start to remember, the game changes. The first truth: your soul is eternal. You are not your body. You are not your name. You are not your trauma or your titles or the role you play in this matrix. You are energy, awareness, light slowed into form. This wasn't an abstract belief for the Atlanteans. It was foundational. They trained their initiates to navigate out-of-body states, access past lives, and move through planes of existence consciously. Death wasn't feared. It was understood. It was a transition, not a termination. Second, everything is energy. That includes thought, intention, emotion. Every frequency you emit interacts with the field around you and shapes your reality. This is not some manifestation buzzword. It's physics, the kind that predates modern science. The Atlanteans used this understanding to shape their lives with precision. Healing was vibrational. Architecture was energetic. Communication was telepathic, heart-based, and multidimensional. They knew that matter bends to consciousness, not the other way around. Third, time is not linear. The Atlanteans operated on the understanding that the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. They navigated timelines the way we navigate roads. Fate wasn't fixed. It was a spiral, always shifting based on frequency. And when you shift your vibration, you don't just change your future, you rewrite your relationship to the past. You become the architect of your own karma. Fourth, polarity is unity in disguise. They knew that light and dark, masculine and feminine, chaos and order were not enemies, they were complements. This wasn't duality as division. It was duality as balance. Harmony wasn't about sameness. It was about integration. The initiate wasn't taught to escape darkness, but to master it, to walk through shadow, knowing it was only ever light in a different form. Fifth, rhythm governs all. The tides, the seasons, the breath, the heartbeat, the cosmos, all move in rhythm. The Atlanteans aligned their lives with these cycles. They didn't fight nature, they flowed with it. When you fight rhythm, you create resistance. When you dance with it, you unlock grace. Sixth, knowledge is not power. Alignment is. The world is filled with people who know the truth, but few who live it. The Atlanteans didn't just collect teachings, they embodied them. They practiced inner alchemy, transmuting fear into wisdom, ego into service, chaos into clarity. Initiation wasn't about memorization. It was about metamorphosis. Seventh, the physical world is a projection. Reality, as we perceive it, is a holographic interface created by consciousness. The outer world is a mirror of the inner one. Shift your perception, and the world responds. This was more than a metaphor to them. It was a spiritual law. You didn't change the world by force. You changed your frequency, and the world followed. And this is only a fragment of what they knew. There were teachings on sacred geometry, the structure of sound, planetary consciousness, the divine feminine, etheric travel, crystalline grids, soul contracts, cosmic law. Not as isolated beliefs, but as pieces of a unified understanding of existence. A map of the invisible that, once remembered, transforms everything. You're not being asked to believe any of this blindly. You're being invited to listen with something deeper than logic. These teachings aren't demanding faith, they're triggering memory. And if they land somewhere inside you like a quiet, thunderous yes, then you're already doing what most never will. You're starting to remember. You've probably felt it your whole life, that pull towards something unexplainable. A fascination with the mystical, a knowing that runs deeper than intellect, a strange magnetism toward symbols, ruins, stars, or ancient teachings that speak in a language you were never taught, but somehow understand. That isn't fantasy. That's recognition. And if you've made it this far, it's not just because you're curious. It's because you've done this before. This information doesn't just interest you, it activates you. Because you're not learning it for the first time. You're remembering it. You didn't randomly stumble onto words like Atlantean, Hermetic, or vibration. You were pulled to them. Your subconscious has been guiding you back to this point, whispering through synchronicities, through dreams, through that quiet restlessness you can't explain. It's not about obsession, it's about alignment. You're being pulled back into resonance with something ancient that never left you. Atlantean initiates were trained to carry wisdom across lifetimes. They encoded it in their soul's energetic field, not just in memory, but in vibration. The moment your frequency starts to rise, those codes begin to activate. You feel it in your gut, in your chest, in the electricity that runs up your spine when you hear something that cuts through the noise and goes straight to your core. It's not just information, it's ignition. Initiation in Atlantis wasn't about joining a group or wearing a robe. It was a lifelong process of vibrational refinement. It required facing the self, stripping away illusion, mastering thought, intention, and emotional charge. It was about tuning the body like an instrument, so precise that it could channel frequencies, transmit light, and interact with non-physical realms. These teachings weren't given, they were earned. And if they're finding you now, it's because you've done the work before. You don't get drawn to this path by mistake. The sense of déjà vu you feel when you look at certain symbols or hear certain chants or stand in certain places, that's not your mind playing tricks on you. That's your soul remembering initiations in temples long turned to dust. You may not remember the details, but your energy does. And every moment you lean into that remembering, you reclaim a part of yourself that the world told you wasn't real. This is why spiritual awakening is never comfortable, because it's not about becoming something new, it's about unearthing what's always been true. It peels back the layers you've been conditioned to believe were you. And what remains is raw, ancient, and powerful beyond comprehension. That's what the Atlantean path was always about. Not escape, but embodiment. To become fully present, fully aware, fully activated in this human form, while remembering that you are something far greater than flesh. You didn't come here to be normal. You didn't come here to conform. You came here to remember, and then live what you remember. This is your return to the path, the symbols that call to you, the wisdom that lights you up, the truths that won't let you go. They're not random. They're markers, signals, echoes from lifetimes where you walked the halls of light, where you studied the mechanics of the soul, where you spoke the language of frequency and moved through the world like a beam of consciousness, aware of your power, your place, and your purpose. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're simply waking up in a world that forgot to teach you how to remember. But now that you've found your way back to this knowledge, the responsibility begins. Because remembering alone is not enough. The next step is embodiment. And once you start to live from that place, everything changes. The way you think, the way you speak, the way you hold yourself. You stop reacting. You start choosing. You stop searching. You start radiating. This isn't just ancient wisdom. It's your blueprint. And it's time to wear it again. Nothing resurfaces without reason. These teachings, these symbols, these ancient truths, they don't reappear because they're trendy or nostalgic. They return because the cycle is turning. Because history doesn't move in straight lines, it spirals. And every spiral brings us back to a moment of choice. That moment is now. You can feel it in the tension of the world, in the collapse of systems that once felt immovable, in the rising hunger for meaning, in a culture obsessed with noise. We are standing at the threshold of remembering, not just as individuals, but as a species. And the Atlantean teachings aren't just resurfacing, they're being summoned. The ancients knew time as something different. They understood cycles, the rise and fall of energy, the breath of civilizations, the return of light after darkness. They marked these cycles through stars, sound, and soul. And they knew that after the fall, there would come a time when the frequency of the earth would rise again. That time is now. The veil is thinning. More people are dreaming vividly, waking up with questions they can't ignore, feeling drawn to truth without knowing why. The script is glitching, and what's bleeding through are the forgotten codes of consciousness. The return of these teachings isn't random. It's encoded in the field. They knew this knowledge would go dormant, and they knew it would awaken again when the vibration of the planet reached a certain threshold. That's why so many of us feel like we're waking up out of a fog. We're not learning, we're remembering. We're not becoming, we're returning. This is not the beginning of a new path. It's the resumption of a very old one that's been waiting patiently in your bones. You might feel overwhelmed by it all, like the world is spinning too fast, breaking too loudly. But that's what happens when truth resurfaces. It destabilizes everything that's built on lies. The Atlanteans experienced it too. They knew that when energy shifts, structures collapse. And while many feared that fall, the initiates saw it as a rebirth, the death of one way of being, and the opportunity to rise again, smarter, cleaner, truer. That's where we are now. Not at the end, but on the brink of a different kind of beginning. But don't be mistaken. This knowledge isn't here just to inspire you. It's here to challenge you, to force you to look deeper, to live differently, to take what you remember and integrate it into action. This path doesn't reward perfection. It rewards presence, alignment, courage. The return of the teachings means the return of responsibility. You're not just here to absorb, you're here to transmit, to carry these codes into your choices, your relationships, your voice, your work. That's what an initiate does. They don't just awaken, they anchor. Because here's the truth most won't say out loud. Not everyone will make it through this shift. Some will cling to the old world, even as it crumbles. Others will numb themselves with distraction and deny the call. But there are a few, those who hear the resonance, who feel the pull, who say yes even when it terrifies them, who will rise. And they will do so not by following trends, but by remembering truths, the ones buried deep, the ones hidden in plain sight, the ones you're reading now. You are not alone. You never were. Every time you question reality, every time you seek something more, every time you stand in your truth when the world pushes you to conform, you are helping bring these teachings back into the world. Not as relics, but as reminders. Not as dogma, but as keys. And the more of us that remember, the more powerful that frequency becomes. Until one day, it's no longer just a whisper, it's a wave. This is where the illusion ends, not because someone told you the truth, but because something inside you confirmed it. The teachings of Atlantis aren't just stories from a long-dead civilization. They're mirrors. They reflect back what you already know deep down, that this life isn't random, that your curiosity isn't accidental, and that your soul has been carrying codes long before you could explain them. You didn't come here to play it safe. You came here to awaken. Now that you've remembered, even if only in fragments, there's no going back to sleep. The world will keep trying to pull you in 1,000 directions, to convince you that this was just another piece of content, another interesting video, but something deeper has stirred. And once that door opens, it doesn't close. This moment right now is a threshold. You either step into who you really are, or you walk back into who you were told to be. But you can't unsee what you've seen, and you can't unknow what your soul already knows. Remember this: you are not broken. You are not late. You are not unworthy of the wisdom calling you. The reason it resonates is because it's yours. The moment you stop chasing answers outside of yourself and start trusting the pull within, everything changes. You don't need permission to evolve. You don't need credentials to awaken. The Atlantean teachings weren't given to the elite. They were given to those who were ready to hold them with integrity. And you wouldn't be here if you weren't ready. This is your time to realign, to recalibrate your life according to the truths that have been whispering to you since childhood. You are not here to obey, conform, or shrink yourself to fit the box of modern existence. You are here to radiate, to create, to embody the wisdom encoded in your being. You don't need to become anything. You just need to strip away the noise until what's left is the real you, the timeless you, the one who remembers. There will be moments where doubt creeps in. That's natural. The world doesn't reward awakening, it resists it. But your power doesn't come from the world. It comes from your ability to stay rooted in what you know, even when everything around you questions it. That's what the initiates of Atlantis understood. And that's the energy you're being asked to reclaim. Not through ego, but through presence. Not by shouting louder, but by vibrating higher. This isn't about convincing others, it's about embodying truth so powerfully that it speaks without words. You've been given keys. Keys to unlock parts of yourself you didn't know were still alive. Keys to step out of the narrative you inherited and into the one your soul came here to write. But keys mean nothing if you don't use them. Knowledge that isn't lived becomes weight. And these teachings weren't meant to weigh you down. They were meant to set you free. So where do you go from here? You choose. Every moment. You choose to remember instead of react, to align instead of conform, to live in resonance instead of fear. You don't need a temple, a robe, or a guru. You are the temple. Your body is the altar. Your choices are the ritual, and your awareness is the offering. Live like it. If this video spoke to something inside you, and you haven't yet joined Insights Academy, you're leaving the deeper layers behind. Sign up now through the link below to unlock ancient wisdom we can't share here. And for a limited time, you'll receive a free digital copy of the Kybalion to support your journey. This isn't the end, it's the ignition. The teachings are returning not to save you, but to remind you that you never needed saving in the first place. You are the remembrance. You are the return. And the world is waiting for you to show up as the version of you that already knows who they are. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."